What is going on there, YouTube? Welcome back to another comic book video. This is the channel where we sit down and cover different comic book stories from different comic book companies. This time, we are going to jump back over to Marvel Comics and continue our coverage over Daredevil as we build our way up to Shadowland and cover that lovely event too. Except we're going to cover in this video the big storyline that was called No Fear. It was the big story that started with number 100 issue for volume 2 of Daredevil, but it also sets up the last phase of Ed Brubaker's run on the character. It also brings back Marvel's version of Scarecrow that is in DC Comics, but this is most likely the best story for the character whose name is Mr. Fear. But either way, if you do like today's comic book video, hit that like button down below and also subscribe to the channel for more content to come in the near future. But I hope you do enjoy today's video. So we pick up where we left off, which is that Milla Donovan, the wife of Matt Murdock, tried to kill Lily Luca. Lily Luca being this other girl in Matt's life currently that has the power to make men go crazy because of how she smells. Except when Milla tried to kill Lily, well, Lily bumped into some innocent man and he fell in front of a train that was coming in the subway and died. So now she's getting arrested by the police because she is being blamed for the murder of the innocent guy. So you have Foggy Nelson trying to reach out to Matt Murdock because his wife is getting arrested by the police for murder. Except Matt Murdock got captured by the second Mr. Fear. The reason why I say the second Mr. Fear is because the first one died. This one is named Larry Cranston. He first appeared in Daredevil Volume 1, number 88, back in 1972. And he had known that Matt Murdock was Daredevil for a long time. The way he found out is because a while back he figured out that it is strange how both Daredevil and Matt Murdock both moved to San Francisco at the same time. So he became Mr. Fear and fought against Daredevil that led to his supposed death. Of course, he did not die. But when he came back around, he went with a fake name so the world believes that he is still dead. So to the world, he is now Professor named Harold Cranstone. Now, the reason why he is mad at Daredevil is because Matt Murdock embarrassed him in a mock court session back in college. So it is petty revenge. He is upset that Matt Murdock is getting his old life back so easily, where Mr. Fear can't even use his old name because he was declared dead. So he is getting his revenge. Then he sprays fear gas in Matt's face and you have Ox throw him out the window. This is the point where I say that Mr. Fear is becoming the Marvel version of the Scarecrow in Batman comics. You will see why here in a minute. But you have Daredevil falling out of the sky and then crashing down in the middle of the street. Of course, that freaks everyone out and you have the cops appear. Except when they appear, of course, this makes Daredevil freak out. This is why I say that Mr. Fear is basically the Marvel version of Scarecrow that is in Batman comics over at DC. The fear gas that Mr. Fear has sprayed all over Matt Murdock's face, making him see the cops differently. At first, it made him see the cops as the Hand, the evil ninja organization. So of course, he thinks that he has to fight against them and beat them. Then, later on, he sees the Kingpin and Bullseye, which really are his two worst enemies of all of his Rogue Gallery members. Remember that Bullseye was the one that killed two love interests of Matt Murdock and still keeps coming after him over and over again. Kingpin was the one that kind of made Bullseye be a thorn in Daredevil's side. Except when Matt Murdock realized that all of this is fake, well, he had already beaten down the cops so bad that they are freaking out because what he did to them. Except when he runs away into an alley and then collapses because he's exhausted and being attacked mentally by the fear gas, that is when he begins to see Karen Page. And this is huge because out of the two women that had died in Daredevil's life, she was the most recent one, and of course killed by Bullseye. So when he sees her, he begins to freak out because this was the woman he loved before Milla, and when she died, it caused so many issues for Matt Lice after that. Except he comes to find out that it was just some old lady, and he has to leave before some random people beat him up because he beat up some cops earlier. Now, while he is swinging around town, he then begins to see two other love interests in his life. The first one, some people kind of forget about, which is the original Black Widow. They dated for a good period of time, except of course it did not work out. Then he sees Elektra, which of course is the love interest that has caused so much pain in Daredevil's life. With him seeing these two ladies, it just makes his mind go crazy and makes him fall back down to the streets again. Then this leads up to him kind of going back over how he met Milla, where she was about to be hit by a truck and he saved her at the last minute. Except this time she speaks to him in a negative way, more of telling him that he should have never come into her life, how he is going to leave her sooner or later, how he is going to ruin her life down the road. He is trying to tell her that he loves her and doesn't want to lose her, but of course this is not real. So he is fighting a ghost here really. Then he is bumped in the head by the same thugs who wanted to beat him up for beating up those cops, except he is not seeing these guys as who they are. He is seeing them as his father, Jack Murdock, what really is the main drive that made him become who he is today. After a while, with him getting beat up by these thugs, well, then you have Daredevil remember that he is doing this for his father. He is trying to be the hero for this city, which then makes him wake up, beat the fear gas, and decides that he needs to find Mr. Fear. So what he does now is go to a place that has some connections to Mr. Fear in his personal life. Matt Murdock's enhanced senses is telling him that maybe the one person in the building is Mr. Fear, except when he gets in there, he finds some random man tied up to a chair with the bomb tied into him as well. Daredevil knows it is too late to save this man because as soon as Daredevil gets there, well, the bomb goes off and blowing up the entire building. So the only lead Daredevil had is now gone up in smoke. So Daredevil thinks it is time for him to go home so he can regroup. Except when he gets home, he is confronted by Foggy Nelson, who tells him the bad news about how Milla is now in jail, which of course Daredevil can't believe, that his wife is in jail, but also he can't believe that she's in jail for murder. Makes him think back to one of the fears he had faced earlier, about how the ghost of Milla was telling him how he was going to ruin her life, how he should have stayed away from her, because now he is making his life, or her life, sorry, fall apart because of him being Daredevil. And so in the opening of the second chapter, we see that Daredevil is going around beating up some low-level thugs to find out where Mr. Fear is at. This is a man wanting to get revenge for the line Mr. Fear had crossed with attacking Milla. Except we then switch over to Turk. He is this low-level thug that usually works for whoever is the active kingpin of the city, usually taking care of the smaller tasks. But we see him talking to some random thugs about how they all work for Mr. Fear, except when these other guards leave, he then calls up someone and tells this person on the phone to tell their boss that he has something they might want from him. So Turk is making moves of his own. We then switch over to Daredevil going to see Milla, who is now in handcuffs that are bound to a hospital bed, because every few moments she would have an episode where she went crazy and tried to kill people or just hurt them. Matt Murdock calms her down and tries to argue that something was done to her because the villain Mr. Fear thinks that Matt Murdock is Daredevil, which of course is true that he is Daredevil, but he is still trying to make the world believe that he is not Daredevil. And you have the district attorney tell Matt that since he has no proof that Mr. Fear did something to her, they are going to charge her for murder. Also the fact that Lily, she told the cops what had actually happened, and there were 12 other witnesses there too who basically told the cops what happened. So unless Matt Murdock can bring some kind of proof to show that his wife is innocent, he is kind of stuck there. You didn't have Foggy Nelson and Matt Murdock go back to their office, except of course Matt Murdock is upset about what just happened to his wife Milla. You have Dakota North tell Matt Murdock that he should consider going to see Milla in the hospital to help her through this tough process in her life. So you have Matt Murdock agree to go see his wife. Except when he goes to see his wife, he goes in as Daredevil so that he can sneak around the place and sneak into her room, which of course is great because he's just not there to hold her hand or just cuddle with her. He actually tries to have her meditate to find her center or find a safe spot in her mind. He tells us that he is trying to build this safe spot in her mind and has a way to beat Mr. Fear toxin that is in her. Well, really hold it back until he is able to find a cure for it, which means that he needs to find Mr. Fear if he wants to find a cure for this toxin. Then you have Matt Murdock leave Milla Donovan and goes to meet up with a police officer who is a friend of Dakota North. His name is Detective Kreutz. I hope I said that correctly. And he is at the crime scene where that bomb had blown up at, where we find out the guy who was blown up is named Dante V. Govich. Apparently, he was a professor at Empire State University. Also that he was someone who worked with Mr. Fear, because remember that Mr. Fear's second identity that he had to use is that he is a college professor. So for Matt Murdock means that Mr. Fear used Dante V. Govich to help him create a better version of the Fear toxin. After that, we see the process of the police and the DA trying to figure out what they should do with Milla Donovan. First, they bring in a shrink like they did with Gladiator in our last video to see if she actually had a mental breakdown. You have Milla Donovan almost attack the shrink as well. Then, when it comes to court, even though there hasn't been an actual trial, the judge still thinks it is best to keep Milla held in a prison cell or somewhere to deal with her because of her mental state. And so then you have Daredevil continue to go after low-level thugs, hoping that he can learn something about Mr. Fear, mainly hoping to find the location of where Mr. Fear is at. Either way though, you have Matt Murdock just break out of his Daredevil outfit and begin to beat everyone up, hoping that he can learn some kind of information, but he's almost more brutal than he is usually. So we see a Daredevil actually beating up thugs badly to just get information. At the same time, you have the Hood watching over this fight, and the reason why is because I think this begins to take place when Dark Reign is happening, and that was when the Hood was trying to become the new kingpin of New York. Now, the third chapter is more of the story showing off Larry Cranston, who is Mr. Fear, being this guy who is enjoying life, that he has almost everything he needs. He has the ladies, he has a crime organization under his belt, he also has the one person he hates who must suffer, except he tells us that he's not done yet, that he still has more things planned to make sure that once everything is done, there is no way Matt Murdock is going to be able to just bounce back from it like it's not a big deal. He even talks about how he used Dante, the other scientist from the college, as someone to make the fear toxin perfect. He then mentions how he is being trained by the best fighters from each country, except he knows that these guys are no match for Daredevil. So he knows that he is still no match for Daredevil, except he's doing this to just make Matt Murdock suffer. Except you have Ox from the Enforcers come in and tell Mr. Fear that they have a new problem, which then the story jumps back to an earlier part in the day, where we see that while Ox was going around being an enforcer, well, he was confronted by some members of the Wrecking Crew. The reason why they are here is because this is the Hood making his move as being the new Kingpin and trying to take over Hell's Kitchen. So basically, this is the beginning of a gang war between Mr. Fear and the Hood for the rights to take over Hell's Kitchen. You did have Dakota North get a call from her detective friend so that she can tell Matt Murdock about the fight that is happening in the middle of Hell's Kitchen. This is the break that Matt was looking for, because he knows that Ox works for Mr. Fear. So that means it could lead to him finding out where Mr. Fear is at and hoping to find a cure to whatever is happening to Milla at the moment. Except when he gets there, instead of just watching the two sides fight against each other and hoping that it will make Ox walk back to Mr. Fear, instead we see that Daredevil jumps in hoping to take both sides out, and then hopefully he can take Ox somewhere else so that he can ask Ox about where Mr. Fear is hiding at. Except the problem is that there are too many villains here at the moment, and making it hard for Matt Murdock to focus on taking all of these guys down, to the point where you have the Wrecking Crew being able to make a part of a building fall on top of Daredevil, which stops him just long enough for both sides of the gang war to leave and go their separate ways. And you have Ox go back and tell Mr. Fear about what had happened. So now we are back in the present day, which you have Mr. Fear tell Ox that everything is okay and that he is going to continue to focus on making Matt Murdock's life hard, and this gang war is not even important to him. Now, when Daredevil gets home after dealing with those villains, you have Daredevil realize that there are some people in his house, which is confusing. But when he walks in, well, he finds out that the police and the DA is letting Milla go home only because Lily, the person that Milla tried to kill. Well, Lily's story is beginning to change. Like, she forgot what had happened. So the court is letting Milla go since their main witness is confused now, but also that Milla still has some episodes. Well, they gave her a nurse to watch over her and make sure she takes her meds until it is time for her trial. With the opening of the 4th chapter, we see Daredevil watching the Wrecking Crew attacking a certain part of Hell's Kitchen. Now, the reason why he is not stopping them is because one, there are no innocent people out there getting hurt. Except also that he was hoping that Ox would show up so that he can stop Ox and figure out where Mr. Fear is hiding at. So all he can do is just watch part of his city get ripped up by the Wrecking Crew. Now remember that Lily was having a hard time remembering if it was Milla that pushed her and made her push that innocent man in front of the train. The DA thinks that maybe Foggy Nelson and Matt Murdock is making Lily change her mind because she has some kind of crush on Matt Murdock, which we come to find out later on is that is the main reason. Except she states that she remembers and says that Milla pushed her by accident. Then with her new powers, which are making men go crazy when they smell her, the DA is having a hard time focusing and makes it easier for Milla. Also, there's a point that you have Lilia asking Foggy if she should go see Matt and Milla, and you have Foggy tell her that is a bad idea completely. Speaking of Milla and Matt, we see them trying to have a normal morning, which is Milla being able to make breakfast for her and her man, except she grabs a knife. It makes Matt slightly freak out, which then makes her have another one of her episodes where she begins shouting and yelling at Matt, also kind of becoming a tad bit physical with him as well. Sadly, that makes the nurse come down and thinks that it's time for Milla to take some more of her meds. Matt, seeing his wife taking medicine, makes him upset and thinking about going back out there and seeing if he can get some information about Mr. Fear. And so you have Matt Murdock switch into his Daredevil outfit and go chase down the two thugs who we met in our last video. These two thugs were the ones who in our last video drove Gladiator to that spot where he went on a killing spree. So it is Daredevil reminding them that he let them go because they gave him information last time. So this time he is asking where he can find some members of the Enforcers to chase down and gather information. That is the group Ox belongs to, but he doesn't go after Ox this time. He actually chased down another member of the Enforcers, and this time he chased down Fancy Dan. The reason why is because Fancy Dan was recently injured, except he can't go to an actual hospital. So he goes to one of the doctors in the Marvel Universe that take care of injuries on the low and some random buildings as a way to get medical help without going to an actual hospital. Except those two thugs who talked to Matt Murdock just a moment ago that he can find Fancy Dan. Once he's able to grab Fancy Dan, he makes Fancy Dan tell him where he can find Ox at. Then we see Ox is out in some warehouse doing some kind of deal with some low-level thugs, except that is when the cops do appear. But while this whole thing was going down, you have Daredevil just watching the cops handle the situation because his main goal was to just go after Ox. He knew that Ox would run away as soon as trouble picked up. So you had Ox run away, and then you have Daredevil basically wait until he was outside to hit Ox with the taxi, which of course knocks out Ox, but it is Daredevil taking Ox in so he can question him on where he can find Mr. Fear. We did get one page where we see Lily going to the home of Matt and Milla, even though Foggy Nelson told her earlier, do not go there. Remember that Milla hates Lily because she thinks Lily wants Matt, which is true. So we see the nurse letting her inside the home. But this chapter closes on Ox waking up and being hung up in some chains because Matt Murdock is going to torture this man to gather all of the information he needs to learn about where Mr. Fear is hiding at. So at the opening of the 5th chapter, we pick up with Lily running out of the house of Matt and Milla. Remember that she went there to visit them, but Foggy Nelson told her not to go there because she is the one reason why Milla had gone crazy in the first place. This is when we jump back 5 days ago, and we pick up with Mr. Fear meeting with Lily out of nowhere, where you have Mr. Fear tell us that he was the one who gave Vanessa Fisk the perfume that Lily had used to make Matt Murdock think about Karen Page. For some reason, the perfume is still in effect and makes every man around Lily go crazy. Then we see some kind of gas that Mr. Fear is using. This gas is making Lily kind of fall in love with him or making her follow all of his instructions. Either way, he tells that if she does everything he wants her to do, he will cure her and also give her the one thing she wants, which of course is Matt Murdock. Then we finally jump back to Daredevil in the present day, as he is torturing Ox for information about where Mr. Fear is hiding at. Of course, at first you have Ox trying to not give up any information, but this is Daredevil, a man who's on a mission and he's okay with torturing Ox. He is trying to get his wife some kind of cure to help her, but of course, after a while being tortured by Daredevil, you have Ox tell him everything everything he wants to know, and Daredevil leaves. Except while Daredevil is leaving the building, we see that someone is watching Daredevil, and of course, Daredevil did not see nor hear this person. That person is of course the Hood. He is trying to be the new kingpin of New York, but also he wants to know what is going on between Mr. Fear and Daredevil. So you have the Hood wake up Ox and have Ox tell the Hood everything he wants to know, except Ox tells the Hood to give him a phone. Now, the information Daredevil got from Ox would make you think that he is going to be able to find the man who has been causing his life so much trouble recently. Except when Daredevil gets into the house, beats up some of the guards, and finally enters the bedroom, he only finds a lady. She tells Daredevil that Mr. Fear knew he was coming and told her to give him a letter. The letter, of course, tells him that he is too late and warns Daredevil about Milla once again, wondering what that could mean. Then you have Daredevil go back home as Matt Murdock, to only find the nurse who was staying with them on the ground and bleeding out. The reason why she is bleeding out is because Milla had attacked her, to the point she nearly killed the nurse. So of course, Matt had to call the cops, which then brings in the ambulance, but also that the cops had to take away Milla because she just assaulted someone else once again. Except once they take her away, you have Matt Murdock realize who was in his apartment, and that person was Lily. So he tells Foggy Nelson that he needs to have a conversation with Lily. And so you have Daredevil go to see Lily, and of course he goes crazy because he almost kills her. He runs in there and starts to choke her out, but knows that he is not a killer. So he then gives her the chance to explain herself and why in the world why she was in his house. That is when she explains that Mr. Fear got to her and told her that he will give her everything she wants. Either way, you have her tell Daredevil that she told him that he was going to stop by, but Mr. Fear had an important meeting to take care of first. Which makes you wonder who in the world she is talking about. Well, we come to find out that she is talking about Mr. Fear, meeting up with the Hood, because once the story switches over to Mr. Fear, you have the Hood walk in and kill two of Mr. Fear guys, then point some guns at Mr. Fear. But then Mr. Fear points his wrist that is holding the fear gas in. That is when you have the Hood think that the two of them should talk it out then. Now in the 6th chapter, the meeting between the Hood and Mr. Fear continues on. But in this meeting, it is Mr. Fear telling the Hood that the Hood can have Hell's Kitchen, that the only thing Mr. Fear wants, of course, is Daredevil. So it is them two kind of agreeing on them making a deal, except you have the Hood mention that Daredevil is coming here, and that Mr. Fear should get ready to fight against him very soon. Now this is where the story begins to wind down some. Yes, you do get this big battle between the two characters. It goes on for a few pages, except throughout the fight and really at the end of the fight, where you have Daredevil winning the fight. You have Mr. Fear tell Daredevil that there is no cure for the toxin that is in Milla. Meaning that whatever kind of toxin that is in her, making her go crazy, will continue to eat away at her. And that is the same for Malvin Potter. Remember, in our last video, Malvin Potter, who is the gladiator, went crazy, started to kill people, and was trying to kill Matt Murdock as well. But we are finding out here that maybe Mr. Fear had a hand with that as well. So a toxin is in Malvin Potter, except again, there is no cure, and Mr. Fear just laughs at Matt Murdock. The reason why is because he is getting what he wants, making Matt Murdock life a living hell. That he hated that he heard that Matt Murdock was so close to getting his old life back after everything. So he thought Matt Murdock deserves to suffer but kept suffering even after his plans were all done. So after that, we see Matt Murdock checking in Milla Donovan into a mental institution, hoping they can find a way to help her, except it is Matt kind of leaving her behind, and this hurts Matt so much because he keeps thinking back to what the fear gas has shown him in the beginning of our video, which was that he should have stayed away from Milla because he ruined her life. Before this, she had a peaceful life, but she did met Matt Murdock. And of course, now she has basically been checked into a mental institution. So it is Matt realizing how much he has messed up with her. Mr. Fear is in prison, and we see him literally celebrating the fact that he was able to win against Daredevil. Yes, he is being thrown into prison, but he got everything he wanted, which was to make Daredevil's life a living hell and make sure that Daredevil will suffer for a very long time. Honestly, I like the idea of someone besides the Kingpin or Bullseye being the one to take a loved one away from Daredevil in the more recent day of comics. Even though this is over 10 years old, it is still a great story. It has done so much for comics. But either way, this is the end for today's video. So please hit that like button down below and also subscribe to the channel for more content to come in the near future. Also, any suggestions on books I should read, please let me know in the comments below, because you never know, your suggestion could be a future video down the road. But I do hope you enjoy today's video. Later, guys.